Hello, everybody. Welcome back to We're Talking Movies. And as always, I'm Andrew, joined by Cade. And today we're continuing a franchise we started a little bit ago. Today we are reviewing John Wick Chapter 2. Now, we reviewed the original a little bit ago, and we both thoroughly enjoyed the original. And you folks definitely like our review of it. So we decided we're going to do the sequel. And spoiler alert, this is also a movie we both like very much. So, Cade, what are your pros with this second entry in the John Wick saga?
For me, what I think makes this movie work really well as a sequel to the original, and just as a sequel in general, is I like how this movie has a different type of plot from the first John Wick. And here's what I mean. So, if you think about it, the movie does still maintain the same theme that the first movie had, revenge. But what I like about it is that while it stays true to what the original was about, it has a different type of formula. It's not John setting out to get revenge for the death of his dog again. Instead, it's about John being forced to carry out one final job by Santino so that he can fulfill a blood oath that he had made years prior. And what I like about that is, John eventually does set out to hunt Santino down, but it's not for killing his dog or a loved one again. This time it's all about betrayal and for burning down his house. And so I like how it's a different type of formula for revenge.
Exactly. That's a very good point. One of my big pros with this one is that, much like the first one, more instantly iconic action sequences in this film. John Wick franchise had already made its name with the first movie for amazing action choreography and cinematography. Yeah, this movie continued that trend. One that comes to mind is John fighting Santino's men in the catacombs with how it's lit from below, battling with Cassian on the subway in the very tight space. It's all choreographed and shot amazingly well. It is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think that I would argue actually that what's cool about the John Wick franchise is that the action just gets better with every installment, which is actually really refreshing too.
It really is because usually it either gets stale after a while or it gets worse after a while in action franchises.
Yeah, and I think that something that just really credits a lot of the action sequences in this movie, like you were saying, is just the cinematography. The cinematography in all four of these movies is just incredible. I think it's arguably some of the best cinematography that I've ever seen in the action genre.
I definitely agree. Everything just looks and feels very slick. It all moves so smooth without a bunch of choppy edits or shaky cam. It's all just incredibly well done.
Yeah, and I think something that really stands out when it comes to what the plot of the movie is, this movie continues to expand the mythology that the first film set up. One thing that we had mentioned was in our review for the first movie, the movie does a great job teasing the mythology without shoving it down our throats. In this movie, we get a lot more into the mythology. And again, they don't beat us over the head with it, but they really do a great job weaving it in without feeling like they're just putting it in for the sake of it. It does such a great job expanding the whole world. We have the concept of blood oaths, there's new criminal organizations. We also learn just how many assassins are part of this underworld. That's something that I think the movie just accomplishes so well.
Yeah, and it doesn't go overboard with it. Again, like the first movie, it's kind of like, okay, here's your first taste of how the Assassin's world works. And it's like, okay, here's the second one. Okay, you get a bit of a bigger spoonful this time, but we're still not going to give you everything. And then the third one does the same. And then the fourth one does the same. And it shows that this was a very well thought out franchise even before the first movie came out.
Yeah, and aside from just the action sequences, the plot, the cinematography, everything, another thing I have to give a lot of credit for is definitely the performances. The performances in this movie and every single movie of the John Wick franchise are all great. I think Keanu Reeves especially is great in this film. I love how he stays consistently great throughout all four films, and I would argue that this is actually one of the best performances of his entire career.
I would go as far as to say it's his actual best performance. I would make the claim this is better than him as Neo. I know that's a bold claim, but I am making it.
But aside from Keanu Reeves, I would say that another performance that I love is definitely Ian McShane. I love his portrayal of the character of Winston. I think he is one of the best characters in the entire franchise. He's sort of the older, wiser friend to John Wick, who's also kind of a father figure to him. I've always loved his dynamic with Keanu. And again, Ian McShane's pretty freaking awesome in the role, too.
Yeah, he is. He just gives such a proper, kind of refined upper class gentleman who just happens to be running a hotel for master assassins.
Yeah, he definitely brings a lot of life to the screen, and I appreciate that. He's obviously an incredible actor. But another performance I want to give a lot of credit to is Lawrence Fishburne as the Bowery King. It is so great to see him and Keanu on screen together again. ever since the Matrix franchise. I think Lawrence just brings so much charisma to the role of the Bowery King, and he makes the role feel so believable. And I think that his performance is something that's also stays consistently great throughout the franchise, along with Keanu and Ian McShane.
Yeah, and it was kind of nice because one thing I do know people criticize the John Wick franchise for is that it does feel a little brooding on occasion. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I can see where people are coming from. So it was kind of nice to introduce a character who exists in the Assassin's world, but is also a little off kilter and a little bit more expressive and emotional, like Bowery King. Plus, it just adds another layer to, like, oh, how deep does the world of Assassins go if, the army of homeless people might actually be members. I just want to give a shout out because I actually think I really like the villains in this movie too. I think Santino D'Antonio, he's presented himself as untouchable, but he's a complete piss cat. Like once things get remotely sticky, he immediately hides behind his status and bodyguards. I think Eris was a pretty good foil to John, and I think making her mute was a decent quirk. And then I actually really liked Common as Cassian. I think he's another great foil to John, and I think that I like how he's presented as an equal, but one with a bit more of a personal grudge against John.
Yeah, I think Cassian is definitely a standout because, yeah, like you just said, it's more personal. It's not just, oh, I'm only doing this because the job requires me to, or I was hired to, or whatever. It's mainly, yeah, like you said, it's a personal thing. And I think that that's definitely, I mean, it's a little bit more interesting for these types of characters.
Yes, and then the last pro I need to highlight is John Wick is not a franchise known to be funny, but this movie has some actually like genuinely really humorous moments without going too overboard. And in particular, the ones that come to mind is towards the end of the movie, John shooting the sumo assassin when he tries to get up and just has this look on his face like he's so done with this. Another one comes to mind is the people on the subway when John and Cassian are fighting just look like they could not care less that two guys are fighting with knives because it's a New York subway. They've probably seen far worse things. And another one comes to mind is Cassian and John in the bar at the Rome Continental after their first fight, just kind of jawing and snapping at each other, but knowing that they can't do anything because they're on Continental grounds. Again, this isn't a franchise known to be funny, but when it does, it's very well done, and it doesn't take away, it doesn't really ruin the atmosphere. It doesn't stay too long. It's not Marvel humor, shall we say. And I needed to highlight it because, again, I genuinely didn't realize how good this franchise can be at comedy when it does do it.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, one other pro that I wanted to bring up before we move on to our cons is I actually really like the ending of this movie. After John breaks the rules on company ground and then a hit put on him and he has 1 hour until it starts. What I like about that is, yeah, the movie does end on a cliffhanger, but it ends on a really good one. And I say that as someone who generally isn't always a big fan of cliffhangers, but again, it's just done so well and it keeps you invested in it because, yeah, you do want to see the next movie, but also, even if there wasn't a third and fourth film, it could still be a great way to end off because you already know that John's going to do what he does best. And I think that's what works really well about it.
Yeah, no, I also really enjoy the ending. And I also like how chapter 3, Parabellum, immediately picks up, like literally not, I don't even think a minute has passed in the story timeline. But no, it's a good cliffhanger. And again, it further emphasizes just how deep the roots of the International Assassins Guild goes.
Do you want to move on to our cons now?
I do. I have two, but they're both kind of nitpicky in my opinion, but I do still want to mention them.
Go ahead.
Number one is for a character who spent the entire movie being a big thorn in John Wick's side. Am I the only one that feels like Eris kind of dies relatively easily and quickly? Like it feels like her final fight scene with John Wick doesn't last as long as it would naturally feel like it should.
Well, and that's also, I think, an issue that we had with the first John Wick movie, how we mentioned how his final fight between him and Vigo was kind of underwhelming. That is kind of how I also feel about his fight with Eris. It's not necessarily a bad fight. I just think it could have been longer.
Yeah, again, that's how I feel. Because again, it just feels, again, this was somebody who was a secondary antagonist throughout the entire movie. But I think the final fight scene before she dies is less than 2 minutes, less than 3 minutes. And again, for somebody who was the secondary antagonist, you think they would get a bit more than that. Again, I know this is really nitpicky, but that just kind of felt very weird to me. And then my other con, that kind of more of a nitpick, but still didn't sit right with me. The very ending of the movie, John and Winston are having their conversation. John fully understood the consequences of spilling blood on Continental grounds. He probably would have known that for years. So why does he even bother asking Winston about it when he very well probably already knows what he's done and the consequences of it.
Since he's part of the same organization.
Yeah, and has been for, a while at this point. And, like you mentioned when you were talking about the performance of Ian McShane, Winston's kind of been in like his like secondary father figure for probably a long time too. So I don't know. It's just very weird and didn't sit right with me. Kind of like my first con. But again, these are kind of nitpicky in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. And I don't have any big cons with the movie. The only thing that I might want to bring up, and again, this is just a nitpick, but I kind of wish we could have gotten some, clarification of what happened to Cassian. After his fight with John on the subway, he got stabbed and then he rides away on the train, and we don't really know where he goes, if he survives or not. I think what bugs me about that is we never find out in this movie what happened to him, and we never find out in John Wick 3 or 4. And this doesn't make the movie bad or anything. I just wish we could have gotten more of a clarification. That's all.
Yeah, I get the feeling that they did that because they wanted to bring Cassian back eventually, and then for some reason didn't. If that makes any sense.
No, yeah, it does. But on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give this movie?
Well, I really, really like this movie, as you could probably tell. This is actually my favorite in the franchise. And yeah, I really, really love this movie. So I'm going to give it a pretty damn good score, and I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10.
Not bad, not bad. I think that I will give this movie an 8 or an 8.5. I think it's definitely a great action film. I think it's a great entry in the franchise. Still not my favorite one, but definitely a strong entry. So I think I'll give it either an 8 or an 8.5.
All right. Well, with that, that has been our review of John Wick Chapter 2. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm sure we'll do the rest of the franchise a little further down the road. As always, thank you for watching, and we will see you all next time.